Hello everyone.
Hello.
Welcome. Today is the 10th day in the Hebrew month of Av, which I'm sure most of you or all of you are aware, it's the day after Tisha B'Av, 9th of Av, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. The day that lives on in infamy over the generations of some of the most tragic events in Jewish history took place on the 9th of Av. Maybe above all, the greatest one is the destruction of both holy temples. The first by the Babylonians and the second by the Romans on this day. And it says the fires continued to burn till the afternoon of the 10th of Av. So, clearly, speaking about that time of year, and we know that time, as I've discussed many times here, time in Jewish thought, especially in Jewish mysticism, is not linear. Time is like a spiral. The reason we celebrate our birthdays, and the reason we celebrate Rosh Hashanah, for that matter, any commemorative event, is not just as to commemorate symbolically that which took place that day, but because time actually repeats itself. So if time is seen more like a spiral instead of a line, like a river of time, a spiral, so the moment that you were born, that you came into this earth, every year, that moment, that day, the year, recreates the same energy that existed the first time that experience took place. So we actually recreate and relive experiences that took place in the past. So every year Rosh Hashanah and every year Tisha B'Av, the 7th, 9th of Av, there's a certain energy. Time is energy. We may not be so sensitive to energy, but there's energy everywhere. Today we don't need any faith to know that. Every technology is based on energy. So energy always exists. The question is whether we're able to tap into it. So essentially, time, as we understand it, think of it like a cell phone, or like a radio, for that matter, or a television that is receiving signals that are out there in space. The same thing is each part of the year has its particular energy, and when we act accordingly and we do the traditions and the mitzvahs and the different rituals that are connected to a particular day, in a sense we are creating a receiver that receives these signals, and you're able to tap into them. So each energy of the day, each day of the year has its own particular energy, and this energy obviously deals with the sadder part of life, but is also very much part of life as well. Part of the cycle of life is dealing with our shadows, dealing with the darker moments, dealing with the more painful and sadder events in our lives. And this can take on the shape in any form. It can be overt trauma, or loss, or death, God forbid, or it could be something more subtle, like our own inner fears, insecurities, the different demons that haunt us. So the last few weeks, during the 3 weeks, the 9 days, and last week, we've been addressing a series on the shadows of our lives. And using, based on the concept in Kabbalah and in Jewish mysticism, the concept of microcosm, macrocosm, so everything that exists in the cosmic universe also exists in the microcosmic universe within us. So we can look at scientific discoveries and discover dimensions in our own psyches that reflect those experiences. So for instance, the last 100 years or so, there's been much talk about what they call black holes. So I utilize that discovery. A black hole essentially is a powerful force in the cosmos that exerts so much energy that it doesn't allow anything to escape, even light. And hence the name black hole. And we discussed the parallels of we find the black holes in our own personal lives, that we go down the rabbit hole into the own shadows, into the darker crevices that lurk, where most of our fears reside. And the different things in life that shape us, it's also invisible. One of the most uncomfortable things to talk about, and one of the most difficult things to deal with, is pain. You know, when people are in joy, they're celebrating, whether it's a holiday, or it's a marriage, or it's another pleasant experience, it's easy to share in joy. But when someone's in pain, it's very difficult to be there for someone in pain. First of all, pain is by nature a very isolating experience. And secondly, people don't feel comfortable talking about their own darker moments. We all, I'm sure, encounter this. So there's an interesting episode that addresses this in the Bible, in the Torah. When Moses first meets God, so you may all know the story at the beginning of Exodus. Moses was a shepherd. That's what the Torah says. He was a shepherd. The sound is working fine, by the way. You see it? Yeah.
Yep.
He was a shepherd. And as such, one day he was grazing, with his sheep were grazing, he was tending to the sheep that were grazing for his future father-in-law, Yisrael, the Torah says. And he saw from a distance a bizarre sight. He saw a bush burning in this wilderness. And as he got closer to the bush, the famous story of the burning bush, he saw that the bush was burning, but it was not being consumed, which was even more surprising to him. And that's when he has the first appearance of the divine revelation to him. A long story, very dramatic, many lessons and messages for us in this chapter. But the one I want to focus on is the Medrash asks, why was it a sneh? A sneh is a thorn bush. Why of all places did God choose to appear in a thorn bush the first time to Moses? And of course we all know that Moses was arguing with God whether he didn't want to accept the leadership. God said to him, I want you to go to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians and free my people, let my people go, so they shall serve me. And this whole dialogue all begins in this thorn bush. Why a thorn bush? God's making an appearance. It would seem to be nicer to have an appearance in a beautiful tree. There are many trees, elm trees and oak trees and rosebush trees. I mean, there's all kinds of different trees that God could have appeared. Why a sneh? A sneh is a thorn bush, which is considered as always symbolic of pain. When you see a thorn bush, it's always symbolic of a barren environment, of arid environment, of the desert, of the wilderness. Even in poetry, thorn bushes are always described as being those forces that remind us of our more difficult moments. So the Medrash answers a very simple answer, but a very profound answer. Basically, to teach Moses and preempt a major question Moses would ask. And that is, you God are summoning me to go to the people and tell them that they will be freed, and I should lead them into freedom. So if God would have appeared in a beautiful tree, then Moses would say, listen, I understand you appear in beauty when things are beautiful, when there's a party, when things are bright and beautiful. But are you also there with us in our pain? God, preempting that question, which would be a major question, was that now we're dealing with Jews suffering in a bondage, in a genocide, in a Holocaust, actually, Egyptian Holocaust. So God preempted and said, I appear in a thorn bush to show you that I am here also in pain, and also in places that are dark. And that preempted the big question, which is one of the biggest philosophical questions: where is God when we need Him most, so to speak, when we're in need? When we're happy and things are going well, most of us feel sometimes we don't need any help. But when we're not doing well, that's when we usually complain. More people complain more about God when things aren't going well than thank God when things are going well. That's how it is. That's the nature of the beast. And all the big questions: where was God in the Holocaust? Where is God in my pain? You see so much senseless hurt, wounds, and pain and suffering. So this question is addressed obviously in the Torah. It's actually something that the Jewish people have always addressed, which is why we're still here, because we were able to look at darkness, at the heart of darkness, at the abyss, and come out stronger. So this episode that I just shared teaches us a very powerful lesson in therapy as well. I was just checking out some statistics on therapy. Today, approximately 40% of adults in the United States go to therapy. I think something like $70 billion is spent a year. And I did some research.
That's just in the New York area, or the whole?
Everybody thinks in their area it's worse, I guess. And which only testifies, this is what we know statistically, that many people won't necessarily acknowledge. These are the statistics. It only testifies to a lot of pain and a lot of hurt, a lot to work through that everybody has in their own inner psyches. And as I said, one of the biggest challenges and questions is, can we be helped in our darkest moments? And those are the more uncomfortable questions, because, as I said, that's an area like a black hole that resists examination. No one wants to look at themselves and wants others to look at their darkest moments. It's the classic stories of the different jokes they tell about people going to doctors and not telling them where it hurts because it's more uncomfortable. They tell that joke. There's two guys who both had terrible pain in their legs, sciatic nerve issues, and they go to this foot doctor. And one of them is waiting in the waiting room. He hears the other one is yelling and screaming. I guess the doctor began to examine him, and his pain was unbearable. And after he finally comes out, and after he's prescribed whatever he prescribed for him, so this friend goes in next, and the first guy decided to wait and see how painful it would be for him. And it's interesting. He sits and it's quiet, doesn't hear anything, doesn't hear a peep. He says, so much self-control. Anyway, he waits. He's very eager to understand, very curious to know what's going on. He comes out, and the second Jewish guy says to him, what happened? I went in, we both had pain in the same foot. I was yelling and screaming, and you were so quiet. He says, I showed the doctor my other foot. The classic story that we look where the light is shining. We look for the keys where the light is shining, not necessarily where we lost them, because it's uncomfortable. We resist when someone gets close to a nerve. That's when we pull back, even on a physical level. So psychologically, this is also true. One of the ways to actually even identify that there's a problem is usually what people resist talking about. The things that people say is not an issue at all. I don't want to talk about that, or I don't want to go there, is usually the place you actually want to go. Obviously, it has to be done sensitively and not some full-out assault on someone's defenses. But the point is that darkness is very difficult to talk about for all the above reasons. And above all, that by definition, darkness means it's dark. And when it's dark, it's hard to see or impossible to see. And yet, it affects so much of our lives. Today's scientists will tell us, astronomers will teach us, that black holes shape the whole universe. Everything is affected by the exertion, by the energy that they exert on their surroundings. Because it's such a powerful gravitational pull that it affects and disrupts actually all the systems out there. So the fact that it doesn't disrupt necessarily our orbits and so on is number one. We're not close to a black hole. But it does create balances that's also necessary. It's not necessarily a disruptor in a negative way, but its impact is enormous, to the point we can't even fathom the extent of it. The same is true in the microcosmic black holes. The fears we carry, the insecurities, the different inhibitions, the ones we know about and even more the ones we don't know about, the unconscious ones, affect every aspect of our lives. How we decide something, our level of commitment, how quick we move. If you look at your own life, look at the areas where you procrastinate, where you avoid confrontation, where you avoid a commitment. They're driven, even though I don't want to be overgeneralized, but they're driven by usually fears. Sometimes they're legitimate fears. I'm not suggesting every fear is illegitimate. Sometimes you need to have prudence and need due diligence to determine if something is correct. But how many of these fears are not in our control? How many of them are just reactions that perhaps we've developed or absorbed and assumed in our childhood due to what we observed around us, the way we were treated? When children growing up, let's say, in a dysfunctional home, where they don't know where the love is going to come from, there's no consistency in the love, develop very, very profound defense mechanisms not to be hurt, because you never know where the love is going to come from. You never know how much you have to protect yourself. A child growing up in a very healthy environment, and where it builds your confidence. Think of it very simple. After a while, day after day, your confidence is built. You know you can rely on the people around you. You can know you rely on your parents, on siblings, on a certain social structure. These things, as we grow older and become adults, empower us. If you grow up in an environment that's a war zone, a battle zone, where you don't know who the next enemy is, and sometimes your friend is your enemy, and the people that love you are not there, either absentee or overt abuse and so on, you develop reactions. These things do not just go away quickly. We're not talking about a one-time thing. You begin to adapt. You begin to adjust and adapt to the circumstances. And as we grow into adults, these things are deeply embedded inside of us, and most of these factors we're not familiar with. How much does fear play a role in your life? very uncomfortable question. Most people don't like to hear that question, because then they have to start looking at things and say, who wants to believe that I'm driven by fear? Who wants to think of themselves that way? I think about it, I ask myself the question. It's not a comfortable question, because you like to believe you have courage, that push comes to shove, you make a move, and so on. But fear, and I don't mean by fear as a trembling fear where you're sitting and crouching in a corner afraid of your own shadow. That may also exist. Fear is sometimes very subtle. You can seem very tough, you can seem very strong, but deep inside, there's some type of hesitation, some type of... In truth, as every human being, we are vulnerable creatures in a vulnerable world. So all of us have elements of fear in the sense, and again, justified fear, because we do have to protect ourselves. We don't know who's a friend, who's not. And you don't just open up, if you're a healthy person, to anyone that just comes your way, because especially if you've been hurt. But I think the problem is really the other extreme, where we don't open up at all, even to people who may be able to trust because of fears. And this affects, above all, obviously, our relationships. It's one thing how you live alone, but relationships, you're immediately dealing with another person. You have to react to that person. That person has expectations, just as you have. How vulnerable will you be? How much are you in control? This is where fear really comes into play. So you want to see fear, you see it in relationships. How people react, how aggressive they are, how passive they are, is very much connected to their, not just personalities, to do a lot with their insecurities and fears. Some people compensate for fear with over-aggression. Some people actually compensate through over-passivity. Just withdrawing. Some people are always looking for confrontation. Some people always avoid confrontation. So like anything in life, balance is the key. This isn't about one extreme or the other. But being that we're coming from the 9th of Av, and thank God now we're going to the 10th of Av, and we go into the next stage of so-called growth. So the powerful thing is that we are able to look at our shadows. Especially Tisha B'Av gives us an opportunity to look at it without so much threat to us. Because you can think of it more in objective terms, because you could say, you know what, we're not talking about my fears, we're talking about someone else's fears. Or we're talking about the cosmic fear, or some type of metaphysical elements of fear, which is an interesting way to address problems. I'll just share with you, it's a interpretation from the Baal Shem Tov. He says, Nifroim la'adam midaite yishalei midaite. Which means when a person comes up after 120 years on this earth, he stands before the heavenly court. So there's an expression that people are judged consciously and unconsciously. And everyone asks the question, what does this mean, consciously and unconsciously? So the simple meaning would be you're judged whether you know it or you don't know it, whether you're aware of it or whether you want to be judged or not. And judged we mean in a positive way. We're held accountable for our lives. So the Baal Shem Tov has a very interesting interpretation. He says that you'll be asked to give an opinion on a particular situation. The situation will be described to you. And, excuse me, to that. A certain situation will be depicted, described to you, and then you'll be asked what should be the ruling. This and this person behaved so and so, and treated another person in such and such way. What would you do? And you give your opinion, and then you realize what you were asked was about you. That's what you did. So that's why it's not knowing of knowing. You don't know it's about you, but you give your opinion, and then it's applied. Okay, you just ruled on your own. Being that it's a world of truth, you can't deceive anything, so you say an honest opinion, and you don't know that it's about you until you're told. So the question, of course, is: was this a trick? Is it a trick to get somebody to to judge themselves, to give like say, you tell us what we should do to this and this person? The answer is no. It's actually a very powerful psychological tool. It's called a cognitive life raft. Some psychologists call it. But I see it as a topic long before it's been coined or named in our day and age, modern day and age. This idea goes back thousands of years, based on fundamental Jewish thinking. That sometimes, just use an example. Let's say your child or a child telling you they're afraid to go to sleep because they're afraid of the dark. Maybe a monster, a boogeyman in the closet. So you can dismiss it if you're insensitive. You can just say, don't be ridiculous, there's nothing there, blah, blah, blah. But if you're sensitive, you realize a child is a child, and a child has sometimes its own nightmares, and they have their own illusions. It doesn't mean they have anything basis to it, but you want the child to learn how to deal with it instead of just dismissing it. So you may open up the light in the room, you may show them in the closet. You find some sensitive way to show the child nothing to be afraid of. But remember, fear is not logical. So it's not like you're going to explain to the child, hey, there's no such thing as monsters. A person is convinced, as we all know, we don't have to be children. There are many things we convince ourselves are real fears. Someone else will show you, or later you discover there was nothing really to be afraid of. It was a figment of your imagination. So, I've told the story of my uncle, my late uncle, who was killed in a car accident. So years ago, he was a little child, and it was the middle of the night, a thunderstorm. So he came running to his mother, saying, he's really afraid. So his mother said, don't be afraid of anything but God. Okay. He goes back to sleep, but the thunderstorm comes back. A while later, more thunder. He comes running again to his mother. She said, I told you. He says, I'm afraid of God. He just replaced thunder instead of thunder. He called it God. So the way to deal with it is what we call psychological cognitive life raft. If you emotionally are afraid to go into a certain situation, one of the methods, sensitive methods, is don't go there. Don't be forced. To force someone sometimes to go where they resist, not always healthy. Because it may break down their defenses, it may demoralize them, whatever the reason is. So sometimes cognitive life raft is, let's discuss the subject matter with your mind. Let's imagine. You're afraid of swimming? Just imagine. Let's go for a type of a mind experiment that you're in the water. And cognitively, you can actually prepare yourself to a given situation, and slowly, as you become more comfortable intellectually with it, cognitively, the emotions become less afraid, and they're ready to peek their head out from under wherever they're hiding, and also experiment or try to experience it. So it's a method that actually works. And that, in a way, is what the Baal Shem Tov was saying, that sometimes we can't address an issue directly. So the way that God does it is sends you a situation that's seemingly not about you. So that you can handle. If someone asks you, you behave this way, you may not be able to hear that. You may be minimizing it, denying it, whatever it may be. So God sends you another person. Actually, it's consistent with another thought from the Baal Shem Tov that says that everything you see in other people is like a mirror image of yourself. Because if you see a flaw in another, it means that flaw is inside of you. Or else you wouldn't recognize it. But it's actually a benevolence, because to look at yourself in the mirror is hard to do. So you see it in another person. That way you don't really know it's you, but in truth it's just meant to teach you about yourself. They say there's one of the Rabbis, one guy came to a great Rebbe and he said, I have a friend who did something really terrible. He's ashamed. He's embarrassed to come to speak to you about it. What can I tell him? So the Rebbe said to him, if he's so embarrassed, why would he expose himself to you? He could have come to me and just say, I have a friend. Which obviously was the case. So often people say, advice, I'd like to get advice for a friend. Which is fine, you don't have to expose everyone. But sometimes that's the way we can handle it. Because it's uncomfortable to address it directly, we don't know whom we can trust. So we shouldn't necessarily feel this is a bad approach. It's an approach that helps a person enter something safely, as long as you're looking for truth. If it takes longer, so it takes longer. The key is not to deceive yourself and just completely ignore a real issue and just make believe it's not my problem. That, of course, is the worst. But whatever it takes, that's the key. So this cognitive life raft is essentially an approach which is very much used, and I would say it's one of the best kept secrets of Jewish life, Jewish history. And that is that sometimes instead of facing a dark element directly head on, we defang the enemy by knowing it. Know thy enemy. Who is it that said, this was the Godfather, he says, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So know your enemy means that by understanding the shadows and the darker places in our lives, even if you don't yet enter, that already helps make it a little easier to handle. Which is why we deal with a Tisha B'Av, which is why we cry. We sat yesterday on low stools, dark in synagogues, lamentations, like sitting shiva. It's not about dwelling or wallowing in pain. It's about having the courage, the strength to look at suffering in the face and know it cannot destroy you. So the first step is understanding it almost conceptually. So the way we understand it is the first black hole of all black holes is what's called in the Kabbalistic lexicon by the Arizal, it's called Tzimtzum Harishon, the first concealment. Essentially, it's a black hole. And the way it's explained, to use an analogy, imagine an infinitely brilliant teacher wanting to convey an idea to simple students like ourselves. But they're very far apart. There's infinitely brilliant teachers in one place. Students are just beginners. They don't even know ABC yet. So what does the teacher have to do? He or she has to do? Has to somewhat go through a symptom. It's called a total contraction or concealment of his presence and his brilliant mind in order to leave space for another person to appear, to emerge. If you have an overbearing educator or parent or teacher, there's no room for someone to forget about growing, for even to emerge. So you need to create a space. It's similar to what happens in pregnancy when a woman, a potential mother, leaves space within her womb for another life to emerge. So the same idea is used on a cosmic level, that the divine omnipresence, which is an infinite higher reality, concealed itself in order to allow for another independent consciousness to emerge, and that's us. So essentially, all of existence as we know it is really a state of concealment. In truth, we are all one intrinsic unified entity. Think of it like one large organism. With all human beings and every creature and every cell on this earth, all interlinked, tied together in one mosaic. But we don't see it, because the Tzimtzum conceals this field of energy that connects everything. So we think of the universe as fragmented pieces. Science today has made it very clear that we've discovered it's not fragmented pieces at all. It is one part of one field of energy. I discussed last week the Stroke of Genius talk and book that the neuroscientist, you could see it on TED, one of the TED conference talks. She had a stroke and the left side of her brain was affected. And only her right side of her brain, which is focusing on the field, sensed everything was a field of energy without the focusing of the details. It's, to use a little more, let's call it a little more creative example. Think of it like if you're a writer or a composer of music, or you're a master of whatever it is that you've mastered. There's a point where you understand the whole idea as one whole. To a student, you have to begin to tell it detail by detail by detail for them to learn. But the person who's mastered it sees one big picture, even though the picture is made up of millions of details. It's like looking at a piece of art. Someone else has not seen the art. You can only describe in details. But you've seen it. There's something about it. There's something that's called more than the sum of the parts. A type of synergy that exists that is not identified. It's not the sum of the parts. Think of the human body. Imagine you had to describe what a human body is like. Human life is like to someone who's never seen a body, who's never seen life. So you can describe that a human being has a head and a torso and a body and legs, and we have a mind and eyes, ears, nose, mouth. You can describe every organ from head to toe, every limb, every system. Will the person really know what a human being is like? Most likely not. Because you'll describe millions of details, but they will not understand how they all work together. You and I know it because we know how we work. We look at each other, you see a person, this is a human being. But a human being is far more complex. When someone calls you by your name, whatever your name may be, they mean more than just the sum of your parts, it's all of you. All your experiences, all your life experiences, and so on. So there's a type of entire field of energy which is really what existence is about, and then there's the myopic vision that we have, which we only see the details. So the Arizal calls this the great symptom that conceals reality. We don't see reality for what it is. That's what the Arizal says. How is that relevant to our discussion? Because this is the root of all problems, in a sense. This symptom is the root of all problems. Dissonance. Well, I'll use an example of a child and an adult. A child, when you look at a child, a healthy young child, exploring the world with free abandon. For a child, everything is one seamless whole. The child does not yet know of separate elements. This person is this thing, that person is that. That we learn. This person you can trust, this one you can't. A child left his or her own resources and recourse, trusts everybody. I mean, obviously children have instincts and so on. But hypothetically, a child just has this ability, just sees everything as one part of its life. One continuum. It's we adults that begin to compartmentalize and things become fragmented. So when you say something is a unified field of energy, usually in those situations, you don't really have room for any real, it's called sins, or any real darkness. Why? Because everything is clear. It's clear what everything is meant to be. Think of like you walk into a room, the light is shining, so you see there's chairs, there's tables, you know what every object belongs and how you're supposed to use it. If you shut off the lights, what happens? The same object's in the room. But because you can't see it, you can bump into the table, God forbid, fall down the steps. You can use something the way for something that's not supposed to be used that way. So if you think of a healthy human being, a healthy child is born completely aligned in a natural way. Just look how a child breathes. Their chest heaves up and down. The lungs are filling to capacity. There are no toxins yet. There are no blockages. There's nothing that is contaminating or distorting the child's functions. Then we start growing into adults, and then we breathe in the toxins. And I mean physical toxins, I also mean spiritual and emotional, psychological ones. And then we begin to become misaligned from what we really were like when we began. So think of it, of a machine that's working fluidly, perfectly, aligned with its purpose, and then it wanders away from its purpose. The tzimtzum is a state of concealment that allows room for independent reality, as I described, but it also allows room for us to stray, for us to misunderstand what this darkness is about. So if you look at it this way, this great teacher I was mentioning, leaves room for the student and now begins to slowly teach A, B, C, D. But because the student is now an independent entity, the student can decide not to study or not to participate in this exercise. So another example given for it is, think of a parent who hides from the child in order to elicit the child's ingenuity to discover the parent. So the hiding is only meant to be a concealment in order to bring a deeper revelation. Now, let's say the parent hides so well that the child at some point stops looking, ceases to search. So the concealment now becomes the root of all problems. Because if there were no concealment, everything would be working smoothly. The darkness conceals can be misinterpreted and understood in the wrong way. It's like a deceptive force. Like a black hole. A black hole can convince you there's nothing there, when in truth there's a tremendous amount of energy, except it's inverted energy. So this tzimtzum has a double-edged sword. On one hand, it's necessary for us to create independence. Two people love each other. And you want to really love that person, but every person has to have their independence. You can't control someone else. But when you don't control them, they may leave you, or they may not be around. But this is the part of reality. You have to be able to exercise restraint in order for it to be real. But restraint can end up, if it's misunderstood, can end up creating a barrier, creating a split. This is all examples of what this tzimtzum is all about. So the root of fear is essentially darkness, a darkness that shrouds the true nature of existence. Going back to the psychological model I was using earlier, maybe you should put on the air is on. Put it on anyway. So the point is that going back to the psychological model, if a child received, just hypothetically, complete and unconditional love from the first moment it was born, this child would grow into a very confident adult, able to take on any challenge, and strong, courageous, because it builds this type of security, this type of trust. If you take away that type of confidence, or you don't give the child that love, what happens is now this child begins to search to search for this love that's lacking. So it's what light, when there's light and things are clear and everything is working the way it should be working, there's no problems. As soon as you leave something room for some type of independence, or you leave room, you conceal, that's where potentially something can go wrong. So if this teacher or the parent is really trying to restrain themselves in order for the child to learn to walk on his or her own, if that's misunderstood, the child could end up getting lost, and so on. On the other hand, you need this darkness because it's critical to be able to allow for an independent reality to emerge. I hope I've been clear. There are many, many examples for this, and it's going back to the discussion we're having here. So, when a person begins to talk about their own darkness, as I said, that'd be very difficult to do. But it's not that difficult, or let's put it easier, to talk about it in a more conceptual level. The conceptual level means that if the divine light or clarity illuminated our lives, there'd be very little room for doubts. There'd be very little room for mistakes. The problem is that we're born in this world and we don't have clarity. We don't necessarily know. None of us know tomorrow. If you have a choice to make, if I go down this path, it's going to work. If I go down this path, it won't work. We're not sure. Because there's no light that's shining and giving us that clarity. It would be great, especially in the area of relationships, as people always remind me. I wish I could just know who God chose to be my soulmate. What do I have to go through this whole process of elimination? I have to go through all kinds of pain and loss and disappointments. I just knew who it was. I'd look for that person and stick with him. That's not the way it was done, because if it was done that way, then you wouldn't have a purpose to your life. Then you're not part of the process. Someone else is doing it all for you. There's a necessity to earn our way, a necessity to own our choices. So it's a double-edged sword, as I said. On one hand, there has to be some restraint. You have to find your path. That concealment, however, when misunderstood, could end up causing a lot of problems and a lot of pain. This is the root of all real darkness in our lives. It all begins in a place that has very positive purpose. Another example used in the same context of the teacher deciding he wants to reveal a new idea to a beloved student. However, he has to gather his thoughts before he does so. So he pulls back and begins to concentrate. And the student, meanwhile, says, "Where are you?" The teacher's silence is misunderstood by the student leaves. And yet another example where the silence was meant really to give more. And it was misunderstood, so it ended up becoming a cause for abandonment, or a sense of abandonment. This is how one of the great Hasidic masters, a great Hasidic, his name was Rabbi Paritcher, explains the idea of the 9 days and the 3 weeks and so on. That it's a form of withdrawal into the teacher withdrawing back into his own mind before he's about to reveal a great new revelation. And the student misunderstanding and thinking the teacher has abandoned me. So this does not justify any painful act perpetrated upon us by anyone in our lives. Because that person is accountable for doing what they did. This is about empowering us. So I'm sure there are many things we all have, injustices that have happened to us, that have happened to us in our lives. So you can sit and choose to dwell and be bitter about these experiences and say, why did that have to happen to me? Why is that person not being punished? Where's the accountability? Where's God? And so on. Far healthier and more productive and mature approaches, it is what it is. I have to figure out how I become a stronger person as a result. You don't want to continue being a victim even when the crime has been finished with, by continuing to live in the shadow of what happened to you. And that's a far harder thing to do. It's far easier to remain bitter, to look for scapegoats, to blame this one, to blame that one, the usual suspects or the unusual suspect. But when it comes to looking at yourself, far harder, but that's the way you want to do it. You want to say, has this happened to me? Yes. It's not my fault. But now that it's happened, what does it teach me? How do I learn to become a greater person as a result of it? The problem, of course, is that any act that hurt us leaves a wound and a scar, that often demoralizes us, demoralizes us, not allowing us to feel the confidence. Like the black hole doesn't allow us to see itself, doesn't allow us to feel that we have the ability to achieve that strength. So that's why we discuss the topic not personally. First we begin cognitively, that there's this big tzimtzum, not about you personally, not about any individual, that there was a concealment that allowed for problems to emerge. But it also allowed for independence to exist. So which one would you rather choose? Which one would you rather have in your life? Someone controlling every aspect of your life and you never having any will of your own? And never being able to fall? Or the ability to fall but to learn how to walk on your own? So anyone who's ever had children knows, as much as the temptation is that you don't want your child to ever fall, to hold a child, you're going to end up undermining your child's growth if you don't let the child fall once or twice. You show the child, I'm there for you, I'm ready to catch you, but you have to let the child walk on his own. You know, use this analogy in the past. Very good analogy for this idea about this guy was watching a caterpillar that went into the chrysalis, into the cocoon, emerge as a butterfly. So when the cocoon began opening up, he sees this new creature, which is now sprouted with wings. It was once a caterpillar. He sees this new creature beginning to emerge, but it's struggling because the cocoon is still tight. It's struggling. So in his great compassion, so to speak, he takes a pair of scissors, and cuts open the cocoon and lets the butterfly free. But to his chagrin, tragically, what happens is, as he watches, the butterfly never flies. He's essentially doomed the butterfly to be grounded. Why? Because the butterfly's efforts, exertion, to climb out of the chrysalis, and its efforts creates pressure that forces liquid into its wings that are necessary for its hydraulics to be able to fly, for its aerodynamics. And by cutting open the cocoon prematurely, the butterfly never developed the strength necessary to use its wings. So it had wings, but it couldn't fly. The wings were too weak. See chicks coming out of a cracked egg. They have to. That every step is necessary. The baby coming out of the womb. It's not pain. It's painful. Any mother knows how painful it is. I will never know, but I heard. It's painful. But that pain and the child's efforts, which looks like the child is like really struggling. If you think about the miracles, I've heard from some doctors that say when the child comes out through that canal and has to really be crushed through. It's almost like you see popping out. It does all kinds of things that help the child breathe, heart pump, a bunch of things that the child does not know how to do inside the mother's womb because it didn't have to struggle. Now it's entering, it needs to be able to do things on its own. And had it just come out easily, I mean, of course it should be as easy as possible. But if it was just simply without any effort, you would never have certain strengths that this child needs. Of course, I'm saying, what about C-section and so on and so forth? It's true. C-section has its own challenges, and they'll say, the doctors will tell you that when a child doesn't have that struggle, there's maybe other things that can be deficient. It can be compensated for, because today we know the different elements, and it's not like, God forbid, doomed in any way that a child will not, if a child doesn't struggle at all, will not have certain resources. But it makes total sense. It's the resistance that causes us to emerge. But what happens if we don't misunderstand the concealment? What happens if we think that the fact that we are left on our own, we think that there's no one really there? That's where the problems begin. So evil, from a Torah point of view, evil is really the absence of light. It's rooted in the absence of light. That doesn't mean there can't be objective evil, but it's rooted in the absence of light. If we all felt that we were part of one organism, all human beings part of one reality, that you are like my right arm, and I'm like your left arm, etc. Would it be possible for one person to hurt another? Impossible. A healthy person, one arm does not hit another arm. Why? All war, all injustice, all greed, all jealousy, all the wars that you see being fought, whether it's physical wars, legal wars, personal wars, psychological wars, whatever they may be, are all based on one key thing, that we don't see we're all part of one larger reality. That if you're hurting, I'm hurting. And if I'm hurting, you're hurting. We don't see it. It makes sense to us. But emotionally, we don't relate to it. This is like maybe one of the biggest impacts of this great symptom that I'm talking about. Now, the reason for this concealment is because we should all come to understand on our own that we're part of one. The whole purpose of existence is that we come to this awareness through our efforts. And it's not given to us on a platter. But what happens on the other side of the coin, we can easily deceive ourselves into thinking we're not connected. And then we hurt each other. So the effort of any true spiritual master has always been, how do you teach people to see through the darkness and realize that we are part of one? And that when something seems to happen to your life that may be negative, in truth is it just may be concealed energy for you to overcome. Again, this doesn't justify the person who's done something to us. They have to be accountable for what they did. But it all begins in a vacuum. When there's no vacuum, there are no problems. Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does human psyche. I was once speaking to a group of teenagers, and who did teens at risk, they call them. They were in rehab after getting into trouble with drugs and alcohol and other stuff. So they asked me to give them a talk before. So I said to them, I said, tell me, nobody here, I'm sure, wanted to hit rock bottom. Everybody there was already coming, as I said, out of trouble. So nobody wanted to. You didn't embark in your journey to become a dependent junkie. So how is it that you got there? What were the first steps that got you there? Nobody in their right mind wants. Excuse me. Nobody in their right mind wants to be an addict. Which human being wants to be addicted to something? That I'm dependent on some substance, and I can't live without it, and it controls my life. So how did you get to this place? So everyone shared something. One said we had bad friends. My parents went through an ugly divorce. I was very down. Everyone had their so-called nightmare, their horror story. This one was abused. I said, okay, these are circumstantial things you're saying. In other words, there's a particular culprit, bad friend, ugly divorce, growing up in a foster home, whatever it may be. Those are circumstances. You're not saying that because that happened, that's the immediate cause. That there's no other factors, because there are people who grow up in that same situation, and that doesn't happen to them. So I was trying to get to the root of it all. So one of them said, is the root that we're really bad people? Is that what the root is? And it just took a few things to get us going, and then we fall? And it was interesting conversations. I said, no, the root is the exact opposite. The root is boredom, usually. I know it sounds simple. Because if your life is filled with passion for something good, but there's no vacuum, it's very difficult to get into trouble. I mean, everybody can get into trouble. But the worst enemy is when you have nothing to do. And it seems very innocuous. You have nothing to do, so what? So nothing to do. What's so bad about that? When you have nothing to do, and when you have passion and energy inside of you, where's it going to go? At some point it starts eating at you. And you become desperate. And then you'll grab whatever comes your way. There's a deep thirst. The spirit has a deep thirst for nourishment. Just like a human being needs to drink water, and you don't get water, you're going to build up a big thirst, and whatever comes your way, it may be poisonous, it may be toxic, it may be addictive, you'll drink. Nobody wants to become addicted, but they want that high. Highs are part of life, and when there's a vacuum, that's when things become problematic. So of course, there are many other circumstances that contribute to it, but the major part is the vacuum. Because if you have excited and you jump out of bed in the morning with a very particular mission and cause that's positive, far less likely that you will get into trouble because you don't have an opening. Your soul is being nourished. Your creativity is being expressed. Your energy is being harnessed. Whereas if that's not being, where's it going? You'll see that people who get in most trouble are usually the people with most energy. Mediocrity doesn't bring great trouble. It brings mediocre trouble. Let's put it that way. Great trouble comes from great energy. The Talmud says the greater the person, the greater the Yetzer Hara, the greater their temptations. There's a lot of energy, a lot of passion. You'll see a lot of people get into a lot of trouble, especially in the sexual area. Sexuality is an extremely powerful force, because there's a lot of energy, sexual energy. Sexual energy is not a bad energy from a Torah point of view. It's a very intimate, a very holy, a very powerful energy. However, when it's not being harnessed, or when your soul doesn't have direction, that's one of the places that's easiest to get into trouble, because it's an outlet, it's a release, it helps relieve a lot of the tensions that we have within us. You'll see anywhere in life you'll find the same story. If it's harnessed and directed and it's clear, there's clarity, far less problems. Now, again, nothing is guaranteed, nothing is automatic. It's a difficult world in which we live. But you make something shrouded in darkness. If you're confused, you're lost, you're empty, you're bored, you're sitting in a dark room and no one's watching you, you can't even see who you are, far more likely that you're going to get into much more trouble. So the tzimtzum essentially really is a type of vacuum. It deludes us into thinking that nothing's going on, when in truth there's a lot of energy in each of us that needs direction. These same kids that I was talking to, or for that matter anybody, had they had the right person at the right moment that they met them, and that mentor would have directed their energy to something positive, could have avoided most of their problems. It's not just that it's easier, a drug or alcohol. It's that obviously it's more available. It's because the energy that to be harnessed takes a lot more effort to harness it in a healthy way. I met a group of people, I forgot what they're called. Very interesting group. Also, we had, and they developed, the guy that runs the house that let these wayward kids hang up and end up created, he got to produce films. I know about it because they came to interview me. It was about a film called A Better World, A More Beautiful World or something. It got some awards. And he got this group of kids, many of them went through very difficult childhoods, and they all became part of this team. They produced a film. And you got to see how they're excited they are about this film they produced. This one's a good cinematographer, this one is a great music person, this one helps with the script, this one uses a camera. It was just interesting that you just take the same energy and you give people something purposeful to do, and it's just day and night. That's essentially the story. So we all have a tremendous amount of energy inside of us. If there's fear and there's darkness, that means there's even more energy than you think. And it conceals itself from us, so we don't know what to do with it. We don't even know how to deal with it. Instead, it becomes an energy that just haunts us. In truth, if you were able to take that and channel it, tap it, it can become a tremendous power in creating great things. You'll see most people, some of the greatest things in history came not in times of joy, came out of deep anguish. I would actually challenge one to say that to take the 10 greatest things that came in, that happened, the greatest inventions in history, guaranteed that there was some form of pain or grief or anguish that led to it. Some loss, some failure, and so on. Because that's what brings out that, and that's not an accident. That's not just because, my anguish had nothing to do, I decided to invent something. It taps that energy, and when it's channeled, it becomes a tremendous force for good. Think of it like one of the examples given is like, think of a rush of water, a river that's rushing water. Okay, the water has a certain amount of power, but then you build a dam. The dam is built. This is it stops the water from flowing. What happens? The water begins to build up and build up and build up. And once it accumulates enough power, what will happen? It'll break through the dam with such intensity that no one could even imagine. And not only will it rush, even the dam itself will become part of the forward rush. The thing that was once the resistance will become now a dangerous weapon, because it all becomes the river that's flowing with such intensity. The challenge, obviously, is how do you tap into it? So in science, they have not yet discovered how to tap into black hole energy. They're barely discovering to observe it. To tap into it is quite fearful, because you get close to it, it'll swallow you up. So how are you going to tap into it exactly? But I'm sure it's something that is on the horizon, that one day science will figure out ways to do it. But psychologically, I can tell you that the Jews as a people are living witnesses of how they tapped into negative energy and turned it into something positive. Came out of a Holocaust. Today there's a renaissance of Jewish life, when we were barely about to be all killed. So everyone looks for the secret. What is the secret behind coming, not only surviving, but thriving The secret is because it's an understanding that there's energy everywhere, and the secret is that there's God everywhere. So even though some people say, how could you believe in God after the Holocaust? Many big believers will tell you, how could you believe in man after the Holocaust? I only could believe in God after the Holocaust. And it's interesting that understanding, as weird as it sounds, that the concealment of God brings out a greater revelation, that is the key. It's not a justification. It's not trying to say, hey, nothing terrible happened, we accepted, the Nazis are not liable, accountable. It's not about that at all. It's about looking at a circumstance in your life, a very dark event, and saying to myself, well, it could either make me a dark human being, make me bitter, break me, destroy me, or I can take this and turn it into a positive force for good. And now I have a lot of anger and grief and bitterness. And if I could tap into that, not dwell, not to self-destruct, or just become a bitter person, channel it, it's a tremendous amount of energy. There's far more energy in darkness than there is in light. Because light is smoother. Things are clear. But darkness creates the resistance. So the symptom that I'm talking about is ultimately the fundamental root of explanation of where problems begin to emerge. They begin to emerge when things are concealed. When you don't know what should be used. Look, for example, you say, I have a lot of talent. I don't know how I should use it. I don't even know what my talent exactly is and how I should use it. That is where problems will begin, because you don't know how to use it. If you knew how to harness it, that would avoid it being used in the wrong way. And you could look around and you see this. I was watching a while ago. It was heartbreaking. One of these shows, they were interviewing a guy who became a hitman. Hired gun, literally, who would actually murder for pay. And they did an interview with him. He's in prison now. How many people he killed, I don't know. I mean, obviously, it's chilling to watch. But I was watching this person. And the interview, I would have gone far more aggressive. But the interview touched a little about his childhood. But I would have liked, this murderer was once a child like any born child. He had a father and mother, hopefully, that loved him. Maybe he didn't. Maybe that was the problem. How did he turn into a person who had no problem killing in cold blood innocent people, simply for money? It's hard to imagine. Like if you could trace the step, I think they do ask him when was the first time he murdered someone. So in this guy's case, it happened to be that he grew up in a home that was a horrible home. So he grew up in a home that was insensitive in the first place. He never valued life. So it wasn't hard for him to take out a life, what's the word I want to use?
Kill someone.
Yeah, well said. There's another word. To flush out, to extinguish a life. So you start tracing it. This person had he not had that background, who knows what it could have been? He could have been a great person that would have brought much life to many people. So it's not about a bad, evil person. It's about a person with energy that simply had nowhere to go. It's not taking him off the hook, and ended up becoming the darkest pipe of energy of actually becoming a killer, a murderer. The Talmud says that a person born in a certain time of the year, talks about the signs, astrological signs, is aggressive. It says either he'll become a killer, or he'll become a shechet, a slaughterer of meat. He'll shed blood. The question is whether he'll shed blood for the good or shed blood for the bad. Now, not mistaken that free will is taken away. The Talmud is not suggesting that he's definitely going to be a killer, but it means that he has that type of energy. So when you look at any given situation, you see something, we'll talk even about very negative situations, is critical to distinguish, and I'm not trying to be academic, obviously a murderer is a murderer, a criminal is a criminal, and has to be punished and be accountable. That's not the discussion here. I'm speaking more academically. Is to be distinguished between the energy the person has and how they use that energy. That same aggressive person, had used energy for something positive, could have done unbelievable things. One of the Chassidic Rebbe says there are 7 things I learned from a thief. He's not suggesting we become thieves, but the 7 things that he learned is number 1 is persistence. If you fail one time, you try again. Just examples. What does it mean learning lessons from a thief? So there's the classic story with Baal Shem Tov. He once gathered. There was once a person came to him with a child who was very sick and he needed a prayer. So he gathered his 10 hidden tzaddikim, a minyan. They prayed to no avail. So Baal Shem Tov said, okay, last resort. He goes out to the woods, a place that many people don't go to. Dangerous part of the woods. Where the highway robbers hang out. Baal Shem Tov was known by them. We see him coming, what can we do for you? He says, I need a minyan, I need 10 of you to come with me to the synagogue to pray for a child. Okay, fine. As long as you don't take us away from our job for too long, we'll be happy to oblige. Okay, they come, they pray. And lo and behold, the child is miraculously recovered. So afterwards, the students who were very bewildered, they said, the 10 great tzaddikim people that couldn't achieve this. 10 thieves? She says, yeah, very simple. I saw that all the gates in heaven were locked, and I needed someone to break in. That's what he said. Called the holy thieves. So a thief is a teacher. There are thieves. I remember once my car was about to be towed here in Manhattan. The tow truck had already hooked it up. I said to the guy, please, a little compassion. And anyway, he says to me, he whispers to me, if we come to an agreement, I'll be happy to do this. So I said, I have no cash on me, but my father's office is a few blocks away. If you drive me there, this is a true story. So we get into, so he unhooks, we get into his tow truck. He's towing my truck. I mean, he didn't unhook, he actually did hook it. And we're driving through the streets as we're talking. This is not an exaggeration. As we're driving through the streets, I say to him, so how did you get into this job of... He says, I used to be a car thief. And why do I have to do it illegally? I could do it legally. Now I'm a car thief, that's a legal car thief. I love to hook up these cars and so on. And, Anyway, I had to give him some money. He's going to tell me that just to tow it and the marshal's fee and all that's going to end up costing a few $100. So give me $80 and that's it. So here I acknowledge this happened so many years ago. You thought I was an honest guy, right? Anyway, he offered it, so I used the money for good purposes. So this is what's going on. So they're legal thieves or illegal thieves. Like they say, the lawyers work for the IRS, and then they are hired by corporations, they close the loopholes, and they are hired by corporations to discover the new loopholes that they created, and then they're hired back by the IRS to close those loopholes. It's like the manufacturers of radars are also the manufacturers of radar detectors, basically. That way, you cash in from both ends. You got to cover the market. So there's the tremendous lessons here, the lessons from a thief, from a dark thing. Why? Because at the end of the day, it's all energy. It's all positive energy. Even the symptom that I'm describing, even that concealment, that black hole that conceals itself and does not allow anything to escape, has tremendous energy. There was once this young teenager, very rebellious, and his father wanted the Rabbi to come and bless him and say, okay, this child should grow up all right. But the son refused to come see the Rebbe, so the Rebbe said, come, okay, we'll go into his office. They go into the office of this young boy, young man, he's like 17, 18. He's sitting with his feet up at the table. His father's so embarrassed, he says, it's great, the Rebbe's here, stand up. He says, no, I told you not to bring him here, I'm not interested. The Rebbe smiled and said, you see, this young man is going to achieve great things, because he follows his own conscience. So you could look at it as chutzpah and seeing a person who's like a rebellious guy, or you can see it as positive energy. It's not justifying his obnoxiousness. It's just recognizing that even in obnoxiousness there's energy. So it's not about forgiving or forgoing. It's understanding how to tap into energy that takes on an inverted shape. As I said, a black hole. What do scientists teach us today about black holes? It has more energy than bright holes, than the stars that shine. Its energy is so powerful that it's sucking in and doesn't allow any light to escape. So there's far more energy there than the planets or the bodies, the celestial bodies that allow light to escape. Psychologically, it's the same thing. there's more energy in pain and suffering than there is in joy in celebration. But it's inverted pain. It's a pain that doesn't let us function. It numbs us. As I said earlier, it deceives us into thinking that there's no energy there. It demoralizes us. So it's about the tapping into this type of negative. I recently was a friend I have, a guy I know, Brussels. We study from time to time on Skype. Told me an interesting. He went to some private schools in Europe, in France, Paris, other places. And he remembers when he was 10, 11 years old, news came that there's a student everyone knew about, one of the biggest troublemakers, coming from a very wealthy family in Europe. So he had all these privileges. He was being kicked out from one private school to the next, and was coming to Paris to this private school. So everyone was looking forward to meet this troublemaker. Notorious troublemaker. No school could to deal with him. So this guy tells me, Richard tells me, so we're sitting in class the first day. He's sitting there. We're all looking, waiting to see the trouble. He's very quiet. The whole class, very obedient, very cooperative. And he says, he saved the best for last. He says, at the end of the class, like a minute before the class ends, he raises his hand. The teacher says, yes, what can I do for you? He says, I sat through your class now, very quietly, listening, very attentively, and I have to tell you, you're a terrible teacher. You really are terrible. The teacher's looking at him, 11-year-old, the little, he says, but there's good news, this 11-year-old tells him. If you come to my home tonight, without pay, without any fee, I will give you lessons how to become a better teacher. So you can imagine he was thrown out of school right there and then, and that was that. So Richard told me he remembered his name. For some reason, a few years ago, he decided, let me do a Google search on this guy. The guy's either somewhere in prison, or he's some great guy. He was sure of that. Because he was definitely not going to be, passive. So he does a search. I forgot the name of the guy. You can look it up. I'll tell you in a moment where you can find it. He does a search, and lo and behold, where's this guy working? In New York City, at New York Library, right here, a block away. New York Library, and I forget his name. It's a strange name. What does he do? He's the director of new initiatives at the library. And he turned around the whole library. He comes up with these creative ideas to solve problems that nobody thinks of. And you got to see it. Check it out in the New York Library. You'll see his name. Look for the director of creative something or other. You look at his biography. A man that always thinks against the grain, is always looking for solutions where people don't see them. This 11-year-old. Tremendous lesson. Now, of course, I'm sure that he could have gotten himself into real trouble and ended up in prison. I have no doubt about it. Thank God. Either he met the right people, maybe he had a good family, someone knew how to harness it, or maybe he was lucky, whatever it was. And this is a tremendous lesson in life. We all have shadows. We all have dark places. We have dark crevices, places we don't want to go to. And I talked earlier about therapy. I did my statistics. Around $70 billion a year, $69 billion a year is spent on therapy today. 40% of the adult population in America. I think there's a half a million registered therapists in this country, just in case you're interested. And if you want to know, break it down, it comes down to around 138 people per therapist. And not most are not good therapists, just for the record. But neither are the clients. So some say all therapists are really clients that thus masquerade as therapists. But however you understand it, the fact is there's a tremendous need, there's a tremendous hunger, and most of it is not even acknowledged. Because what I just said are official statistics. How many people need therapy don't go, and how many people who go don't help. Because we have a tremendous amount of fears, insecurities, inhibitions, which is interesting for a world in which we live that seems so advanced technologically. That you can press a button and basically get any food, any time, any season, anywhere. It could be boiling hot outside and you sit in air conditioning, create our own artificial worlds. When it comes to the psyche, you can't create anything artificial. You can masquerade, you can hide, you can run, but you can't hide. Or you can hide, you can't run, however you want to interpret it. But we carry tremendous amount of, some even called shame. Shame. Fear. Shame was coined in the 70s by John Bradshaw. He was one of the pioneers in psychology of the inner child. We have fears, insecurities, and many of our ambitions and the things we do in life are very much shaped by negative forces. Lack of commitment. As I said earlier, many things that the decisions we make that we don't even know where it's rooted. We may be compensating for a lost love. Some people claim Citizen Kane is the best film ever made. It comes down to a psychological story called Rosebud, of a great man who achieved greatness, and of being simply lost his innocence as a child. If you know the analysis of that film. We all lose our innocence at some point. In today's day and age, many of us did not get the love we deserved as children. And we're looking for that love one way or another. We're looking to be loved. And sometimes ambition in business, success in other areas is really coming down to I want to be loved. I want to be respected. I want to be validated. Often that's driven by a lack of validation. Now, if it's harnessed properly, it can end up being a major force for good. Some of the greatest, as I said, inventions in history came out of grief. They were born out of anguish, not out of joy. Some of the best works of art, music, literature, came from terrible pain. You start reading about some of these great authors, you start reading about their lives. Their lives were not easy. Some of the best novels ever written, some of the best stories ever written were people who were going through terrible times. Either a lost love or other type of loss. Now, God should bless us all. We shouldn't need a negative to bring great things in our lives. But there's tremendous energy in all of that. And as I discussed at length, the shadows, the tzimtzum, which is the root of it all, is a deep, deep concealment, a type of a shroud that conceals true reality. When in essence we are all part of one field of energy, we don't sense it. So on one hand, this concealment allows for us to be independent entities making choices. On the other hand, it has a downside when it's misunderstood. When you give someone independence because you want them to grow on their own and instead they go off and they misuse it, they abuse it, what happens? So the Baal Shem Tov has this very powerful analogy that I often use. To start with like a little humor. So when you hear about holidays, Jewish holidays, especially Woody Allen, that's the knee-jerk reaction. The first thing, Jewish holidays, food. Or some people say in general, Judaism, food. Food. So you have latkes on Hanukkah and hamantashen, krep l'cham Purim, and you have blintzes on Shavuos. Then we have the lights for Rosh Hashanah, and Passover, of course, has its own menu. And even Yom Kippur, we're obsessed with food by not eating. And then the day before Yom Kippur, you eat twice for the Yom Kippur. So you have a whole series of food. What's so spiritual about food? And he gives this very powerful analogy of a king, an aging and ailing king who realized his time was coming. He wanted his son to be the heir to the throne, but the son grew up in a spoiled environment. He was always catered to, never earned his way. So he says, I'll send my son away from the palace. I'll send him out to live among the subjects. Let him live among the people without any special treatment. And he'll learn to be sensitive. And one day he'll earn his way to be a true leader. Okay, the day comes, the fateful day comes, the father and the son hug and say goodbye, and he says to him, remember, I'm sending you for a reason. Never forget why you're going where you're going. It's all about you earning your way and earning your right to be able to be a true leader. The father, anticipating that the child will slowly assimilate and forget his ways, forget where he comes from, decides to send his child a letter several times a year reminding him of where he comes from and the purpose of his life. Now what happens is exactly that happens. The child does, the son forgets. The years roll on, but every few months he gets a letter from his father, reminding him, dear son, remember, you're my son. You're being groomed to be a great leader one day. Now when the son gets the letter, he wants to celebrate. He's excited, he wants to celebrate. Problem is, he's living among people who don't know who he is, don't know, they'll say, what's he going to tell them? I'm going to be your king one day? They'll think he's either insane or they'll be offended. So he says, you know what? Free drinks on me. He makes a party, throws a party. Everybody can come to the party. food, drinks. While everybody's partying because they got free food and drinks, he's partying because he received this letter from his father. So Baal Shem Tov says, this is an analogy for life. We all, the soul, before it comes down to this earth, lives in the spiritual realm, so everything is comfortable there. Doesn't have any challenge. It's thrust into a world that is disconnected. We're here, we think we're on our own. And we wander off, or even made to forget, the Talmud says we're made to forget the entire wisdom that is infused in us during pregnancy. And we grow up in this world, basically lost souls, looking for direction. Some of us find it here, some are there. But from time to time we do get a letter, a reminder. The problem is the body is not interested in the spiritual awareness. So God says, you know what, feed it, give it food, give it drinks, make it comfortable, let it be celebrating because it got good drinks and food. Meanwhile, the soul can celebrate for a deeper reason. So in any opportunities we have in our lives, all of us have unique opportunities. The Talmud says no two people are alike, no two people have the same skills. Every skill, every opportunity is an opportunity for the positive. Even negative things that happen in our lives are opportunities. But they're hidden from us. And it's for us to recognize and understand that there's a deeper story behind everything. Kierkegaard wrote that we can only understand our lives backwards, but we must live our lives frontwards. It's like a film. When you come to the end of it, you see how it all built up. While you're going through the frames, some things don't make sense. Some things actually sound absurd. Some things are very inappropriate. Something dark. So it's a bigger story. It's a bigger picture. So this time of the year, that's what we focus on. On one hand, we look at the shadows. We're not afraid to look at it. We're not looking directly. We look at it more conceptually, as I said before. We look at the idea that all problems begin in a vacuum. All problems begin when there's a dark state of being. And then slowly, when you begin to adapt and assimilate that idea, you go back to your own life and you say the same is true. When do we make most of our mistakes? When we're confused. When we have no clarity. When we are being deceived, either intentionally or unintentionally. When there's clarity, it's far easier to see. If someone says, here are two paths. This is the path of life, this is the path of death. This is a good path, this is a bad path. So if there's a light shining, you see, okay, this looks right, this doesn't. What happens if it's dark? If it's dark, the paths are still there, except you can't see them. So the challenge is for us to be intuitive enough, to be wise enough, to not allow ourselves to be deceived, and find an answer. Not just fall into a trap, or say, I have no way to resolve this. You shine a light by going to objective people, by looking at people with experience, doing things that help you shed light. So our own fears, our own darkness, our own darker corners of our lives can end up being great tools if you don't let them control you. And the way you don't let them control you is not ever give in and think that they're more powerful than you are. Don't give in to the deception that they're not there. That's the biggest enemies are the ones that want to make you think that they don't exist. So you have no control. To recognize, to defang an enemy is to recognize there is a force here. I can't see it because it's shrouded in dark like a black hole. It exerts force on my life, and if I tap into it, it can give me unbelievable power. Now, as always, it's not easy to do on our own precisely because of its power, it makes you think that you don't have strength. So how do you counter that? Which is why we need sometimes others. I've heard you read some of the brilliant generals in history, how they were able to take fears of soldiers, basic fears of new soldiers, of young soldiers, and turn them into unbelievable strength. Now, I don't like to bring an example from war, but war is sometimes the most efficient machine because it's a very clear battle. Here's the enemy, here's the ally, and so on. Great coaches, life coaches, are people who don't necessarily just show you your strengths. They take your liabilities and turn them into strengths. If you know anything about martial arts is not about how powerful you are. It's knowing how to use the energy of the other person against them. So it's not just, the Western world, we wield a punch. It's firepower, Or they used to say size matters. Today it's not about that. It's about wisdom. It's ingenuity. It's knowing how to use energy against itself. So if there's an energy coming your way that's too powerful, a good swimmer doesn't fight it. A good swimmer knows how to navigate. When you fight that which you cannot vanquish, it ends up weakening you. If you know how to ride with it, it ends up strengthening you. So it's all about navigating the cycles of life. This period in time, we're coming out from the saddest period of the Jewish calendar, is a period that teaches us how to absorb, how to learn from challenges, how to ride on the crest of a dark wave. And then it leads us into the next week. A few days from now is the 15th of Av, the Hebrew month, called the full moon of this month. So the Arizal, the Holy Arizal, a great mystic, says that just as the descent, the destruction of dignity of Malchus in the 9 days, so too is the ascent, the great light that shines in the full moon. And what does it shine? It shines on that it gives you an intensity that's only possible, an outgrowth of the black hole of the 9 days. So you have in Kabbalistic terminology, you have 10 spheres, not 9, not 11. Because 10 is a complete number. 9 is a darkness. It's all there, but you don't see it. And then comes the 15th of the month, and then to complete the picture, you see a full moon. Full moon is symbolic of full intensity. But the moon, interestingly, feeds off its darkness. At the moment of extinction, about to disappear, it's reborn. We call it the birth of the moon. Moiled Halavana. A birth. The sun shines all the time, so it teaches us a lesson about intensity, perhaps. It teaches us a lesson about light. But the moon can teach us a lesson about rebirth after loss, which is why the moon has lessons that the sun can never teach us. It waxes and wanes, goes through ups and downs. It's much more aligned to the cycles of life, the moon, than is the sun. And maybe that's why you see two people in love. You never see them staring at the sun, but you'll see them gazing at the moon. Even with sunglasses on the sun. Because there's something about the moon has a haunting shadow. It's a shadowy light, silver light. It's actually only a reflection, but it's a reflection. It's not just a mere reflection of the sun. It has its own personality, exerts its own strength. It affects the tides on earth. There are plants that only grow to moonlight and not to sunlight. So the same is true in our lives. The shadows of our lives have the power to create all kinds of new creatures, positive ones. Or, when misunderstood, they will create monsters. And they're coming from the same energy. The same negative energy, the same dark energy, could either be tremendous power to build or tremendous power to destroy. But its power to destroy is resting on concealment, as if like no one's there. You can deceive yourself into thinking that nobody's watching. You deceive yourself into thinking that we're not really all part of one reality. So the challenge is, how do we overcome this deception? Is by recognizing the way you study the concept of tzimtzum, you study the concept of how God concealed, that this existence is really a state of concealment. It helps you defang the enemy, as I said. It helps you understand what is truth. Because to know what something is covering up is just as important as knowing that something is revealed. Like the Baal Shem Tov says, there are two types of concealment. There's hester and there's aster, espana. There's a concealment, and then there's a concealment that conceals the concealment. No, it's dark now at night, right? Everybody knows it's dark. That's good news. You know it's dark. What happens if you convince yourself it's light outside? Then there's no hope, because you think you're already light when it's not the case. I remember I was in London years ago, and I was telling a story from the Talmud. The Talmud says that at the beginning of creation, Adam and Eve, after they ate from the tree of knowledge. So that Friday night, the first Friday night of creation, was all light. There was no dark. There was no night. The first night came was after the sun set, Saturday evening. As the sun was setting, they had never seen a sunset. They had never seen darkness. So Adam and Eve began to tremble, the Talmud says, because they said, we destroyed the world. They thought the darkness, as the sun was setting, they thought this would be a cause for destruction of all of existence. That's what they thought. So they couldn't go to sleep because they thought they had destroyed the world. And remember, imagine someone living in light all the time and suddenly sees it getting dark. So they stayed up all night, praying, trembling, afraid, restless. And then they saw the sun begin to rise. They realized, Elam Kiminah, that this is just the custom of the world. The world will go through its cycles night and day. So you can read this Talmud in two ways. You can read it as a positive, as a negative. As a positive, you can read it as, here you have, well, first as a negative. As a negative, here they were really concerned that they destroyed the world. And then they realized, hey, you know what? It gets dark. We didn't really, it's not our fault, so to speak. As a positive, you can read it that even when it gets dark, you always know tomorrow the sun will shine again. So a fellow who was there at my talk when I was delivering this told me that, came over to me, said to me, I'm a Holocaust survivor. And I have to tell you that my whole family was destroyed there. But I remember some vivid memories that really always disturbed me terribly. So I remember waking up as a kid. He was, I think, 11, maybe 12, 13, a little older, 14. He says, I'd be lying in the bunker. And when you wake up after a real exhausting night, you sometimes forget where you were. He said, I would see from the Carpathian Mountains, I'd see the sunrise. And I thought for a moment, oh, what a beautiful new day. I saw blue sky, sun rising. And then suddenly I realized where I was. Looking out from a bunker, about to be killed perhaps. Living in misery, beyond misery, the dehumanization. And I developed such anger. Above all, to room to the sun and to God. I said, at least one morning don't rise in protest of what you're seeing here. What kind of nerve do you have to rise as if you're shining in a new world when you're seeing such a hell? Now, it may sound surprising, but some of you may be familiar. The fact is, when people suffer greatly, they do fixate sometimes on objects and they begin to develop a very deep, even anger, or that nobody protested. There's one of the great articles written right after the war by Abe Rosenthal. He was a New York Times writer. So he was one of the young reporters. He came to see Auschwitz. And he saw the death, smelled it. He said the most painful part to see, he says, was that the grass was beginning to grow when you saw flesh, nails. And he said nature has its obscene way of covering up on pain. Just continues to do its thing as if oblivious. So there's that element. And he said to me, he was so angry. And he moved to London. He really could not come back to himself for years, unable to live. And one morning he wakes up and he sees the sun shining again. This was 1952, 7 years after the war. And he woke up and he said, I suddenly built my strength. Because that same sun that betrayed me and betrayed us is still here. And it's shining and gave me a message that I could also reawaken my life. And this he was sharing with me because I was talking about this topic in the Talmudic story. So no one should ever know of any pain. God should bless us all. We should only have joy and celebration in our lives. But the fact is, life is cycles. Like I told that cardiologist that said to me, his life is too complicated. He'd love to just have peaceful animal bliss. Being a cardiologist, I said, so what do you mean? You mean like a flat line? He said, no, not that. A flat line is not a good sign on the cardiogram. You want to have life as the cycles. You want a wave. That's life. Life is ebb and flow. You don't want extremes, peaks and valleys, but you want a constant balanced flow. That's life. Life is mobile. The idea of a couch potato, the idea of just sitting stationary, that's a human creation, distortion actually. Children are always moving about. Life is about movement. Even when we're asleep, our bodies are moving. In a slower way, but they're still moving. The idea of aspiring to do nothing is a human invention, especially in the 20th century, 21st century. Life is movement. So the cycle sometimes brings you to higher points. The cycle ends also. If you breathe, you exhale, you inhale. Right? When you exhale, you're exhaling toxins. You're exhaling stuff, and then you breathe in fresh air. and it's a constant contraction and expansion of the heart. You eliminate waste, you bring in new fresh. It's the cycle. It's a cycle. It's like like the winds and the rains of nature. It's the cycles of the seasons that constantly bring fresh life. And then things die, and then they're reborn, and they regenerate. The same is true in time, and this period in time is coming from destruction, restoration, rebuilding, from a dark moon to a full moon. We come from Av, we come to Elul. Elul is a month of love. That is born out of a month of ashes. Yesterday afternoon, we're told, in the middle of the destruction, the Messiah is born. You have redemption is born in the throes of pain. A child is born, the mother is suffering most. So you have this constant dance, this constant balance. And the key thing is to realize that when you're in a darker place, or that the darker places within us are stepping stones. They're not there just to stay. When you let them just decay, you let them just remain immobile, stationary, then they just become heavyweight, a fear, a darkness. If you have fears, if you have resistance, if you have insecurity, see it as energy that's waiting to be released. Don't succumb to it and say, you know what, I just will surrender to it, because then it becomes dead weight and starts weighing on you and very powerfully so. So it's about releasing this energy and channeling it and harnessing it. And that's that story, the cycle. That's how the cycle works. And then, when we realize that we are able to do that, then potent, enormous energy comes out of those darker places. To do so requires, obviously, as I said, first a cognitive life raft, to be able to just absorb these ideas without feeling that you're under attack or feeling that it's about you, and then applying it to your own darker corners. It's always best to begin the more grayer corners. It's harder to go to the darkest places. Hemingway wrote, life breaks all people, and some are stronger in the broken places. But he unfortunately proceeded to actually commit suicide. So he doesn't have much credibility with the second half. So yes, it broke him, but what he said was true regardless. Some are stronger in the broken places. They say the artist Rothko, a Jewish artist from Russia, who at the high point of his fame committed suicide. Success, wealthy, late 60s or 1970 it was. So, and people wonder. I was reading his writings. So he began as a conventional artist, then later became an abstract artist. You see, some of his paintings are known for these large murals of different colors. They almost look like squares in colors. And he began, if you look through his career in the 50s and 60s, the colors begin light, very bright. The yellow, reds, oranges. And slowly, through the 60s, they start getting darker and darker. As he explains, he was deconstructing existence or nature. You begin with, let's say, you see images, some of these are deconstructed, like try and get to the core of it all. An interesting thing that people are not aware of, he was a student of Kabbalah. He studied Jewish mysticism. And one of the things that intrigued him was the tzimtzum of the Arizal. The tzimtzum is the ultimate deconstruction. What lies at the heart? If we were able to strip all the cosmetics, all the peripheral accrements of nature, of ourselves, of our psyche, what do we find at the core? So if you ask Freud, another Jew, we would tell you, you find the id, the id, the selfish, sexual, craved narcissist. And then there's the ego and superego and layers that allow us to behave as civil creatures. If you asked Richard Dawkins, so he wrote a book called The Selfish Gene. Similar. You find selfishness, survival of the fittest. We're all just me. That's what lies at the heart. And if you ask the Arizal, he will say that the first step is you get to a place called darkness, called the tzimtzum. It conceals everything. Makes you think that you're selfish. It makes you think that the heart, all you are is about me. But those that don't understand the Arizal, stop there. The Arizal said that tzimtzum was preceded by something. There was light behind the door. So Rothko, and you can see it from his writings, he's searching for the root of existence. If you strip it all, deconstruct it all, what do you come to? And he was getting darker and darker. He was getting to darkness. So his light colors turned dark to the point, if you look at his last ones, they're very dark. They're dark gray, black, brown. And though I didn't interview him, but clearly from at least my understanding of it, is that he came to a point that he came to the Tzimtzum itself. It was pure so dark, he couldn't live any longer. As I said, he didn't have any tragedy. He had not failed. He was at the height of his career, and takes his life. My understanding is that similar, same years was when Jimi Hendrix overdosed, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison. I don't know, they're all in the same category. Many didn't die. Many of them just blew their minds. These are great geniuses that had nowhere to go. They're higher and higher and higher. They had nowhere to harness it and ground it. But when you learn the Arizal properly, you realize that Tzimtzum is just a masquerade. Had Rothko come to this class, where he had learned the little Chassidus and know where the Arizal took his ideas from, and saw them in the full context, he would have found behind the door of all that darkness, total blackness, a tremendous amount of light, like a black hole. A black hole has far more power than, as I said, the sun or any stars. But that's where many people come, the id. In truth it's the yid, the pintel yid, the spark, not the id, the Y-I-D. And that's the understanding, that at the heart and core we are essentially great people. We're angels, beyond angels. We are beautiful musical notes created in the divine image, which then is concealed from our eyesight, thrust into a world where we are on our own, or we think we're on our own, and then we feel like we're victims, or we're of circumstances. Darkness prevails. Here and there we find some light, but the dark forces in us control much of our lives. But in truth, that darkness is just a form of deeper energy, just waiting to be released. Now, when I say just, I don't want to minimize it, because this still just is the difference between life and death, between misery, a life of misery, and a life of happiness. That's why you'll find people who suffer greatly, but you find that they have fundamental joy. And others suffered less, but they're broken. This isn't just personality differences, it's whether they see the whole picture or not. So there's a larger picture. And as we said, the calendar now, we enter into a time where we start entering into love, which we shall continue discussing in the coming weeks. So in conclusion, I would say, final analysis of this class, is that we all have dark corners, and that may be embarrassed of, we'd rather not expose, we'd rather not talk about. I'm not suggesting you force yourself to do that, but recognize these forces affect your life, first of all. So don't think, even if you don't talk about it, doesn't mean it's not affecting you. Above all, it's important to learn how to tap into it, how to look at it. And we do so by, as I said, unconsciously, by looking at someone else's darkness. Very often people come to you for advice, you give great advice that you never follow. You ever have that? You're great at giving someone else advice in exactly the same situation you cannot follow. Sometimes it's almost like a comedy. But it's also a blessing. You know why? Because sometimes the way God works is He sends you someone else. So you're told that, so you elicits from you the right approach, and you're really paskening, you're really ruling about yourself. You just don't know it yet. It's a mirror image. So if you're wise, you take the lesson and you say, okay, why is it that I can't apply the same wisdom to myself? And then you start discovering and looking. We're subjective, we're blinded, we have blind spots. It's easier to see it at someone else than to see it on ourselves. But if you go with it, you have integrity, with an honest approach, and find the right coaches, mentors, you can actually discover the unbelievable strength in some of your greatest, what you may think greatest liabilities. You have to just know how not to fight it, how to harness it, how to ride the crest, the waves. So I extend my blessing to everyone that as we go from Tisha B'Av, the 9th of B'Av, into the 10th of B'Av, into the 15th of B'Av, into Elul, and the high holidays, we should learn to transform our darkness, not escape from it, not deny it, learn to harness it, and to turn it into tremendous tools of growth. And just like that fellow that I mentioned about, who's now in the New York Library, each of us can take things that sometimes seem so negative If you turn it right, they can end up becoming an unbelievable tool. Like that the Rebbe that learned things from thieves. You can learn things from everyone. That doesn't mean that what they're doing is right, but that means that in everything there's a lesson to be derived, even from the negative. And especially those of us that have some scars and wounds and tattoos. And we have experiences in our lives that we're not proud of. That too must be tapped and turned into a positive. Because you have particular credibility and experience that someone else doesn't have. That can help someone either avoid similar situations or a wisdom and a knowledge, an insight, an intimate knowledge about something that those that have not been there don't have. And you'll find people who really have any given difficult situation, when they begin to use their knowledge that they learn from it. Say, a mother I know, mother of a Down syndrome child, she right now makes herself available. She helps a tremendous amount of many, many mothers. She's taken a liability and become the insights that she's learned from it, helping many people cope, look at strategies, look at it directly, not be ashamed, and figure out ways to build even for themselves and for their children. These are the tools that we have to be able to channel anything into positive. So I bless everybody with a very illuminating week. To recognize dark when it's dark, to recognize light when it's light, to use the darkness as a catalyst to bring greater light, and to use the light as clarity to achieve greater heights as well. So until next week, thank you very much. And Philip will not be giving his class tomorrow night. And anyone here has not left your email address, please do so. Again, it's an honor and pleasure to speak to all of you, to share our journey through all the cycles of the ups and downs of our lives. Should be more ups than downs, but even the downs should only bring greater. Thank you. Everyone have a good week.